night we were talking about the laws of creativity. And really the lecture last night was not so much on religion as it was on, I guess you'd call it mental therapy or something, psychology, or I just call it plain common sense. I feel about psychology about like my friend Jeannie. She says, psychology's all right, but you got to use your head once in a while. Anyway, just rules of training the subconscious mind. Now, I want to tell you something nice about that. And that is that if you do that for a little while, after a while it becomes spontaneous. It becomes just natural. I mean, you just naturally fall into that way of thinking, and you don't have to do it anymore. And the younger you begin that, why, of course, the better it is. One time I got off the plane in Tucson, and 2 or 3 boys met me at the plane, and the youngest one of them, Alan, who was about 13 at the time, I think, said, I'm awful mad. He said, I woke up with a sore throat this morning, and I haven't been able to make it go away yet. Usually I can do it in 5 minutes. And today I haven't been able to make it go away yet. And I said, well, how do you make it go away, Alan? He said, I don't know. He said, I used to do it the way you said in your book. But now I don't know how I do it. I just think, oh, I've got a sore throat. And then I don't know what I do. But in a minute it's gone. But he said, today I can't do it. I wonder why. I said, well, I don't know, but you must be off the beam somehow. You see, it had become spontaneous. He just didn't know how he did it. But on that particular day, he couldn't do it because he was off the beam. He didn't know why he was off the beam. I didn't bother to find out. I knew he'd get back on it. And it just naturally, after all, he was only a little boy. I had an idea that something had happened in his life that had upset the clear flow of God's light through him. Well, now, at one time in my own checkered career, I got off the beam. And I stayed off the beam for quite a long time. Oh, several years. Getting more and more off the beam, gradually. And I couldn't figure what in the world was wrong, because I was doing all the things that up to the present time we have talked about. All of those mental disciplines and all of the very forceful sending out of forgiveness and the daily meditation, which I haven't talked about much here because other people have told you, and you've practiced it here, and I'm sure, and you've read it in my book and so on, and I'm sure that you do know now that part of this business is to take time every day to just get near to God. Take at least, well, for you children, just a short time is enough, maybe 5 minutes. But for us older people, it takes us longer to get our minds cleared up. We've gotten them cluttered up over so many years, and it takes us a little longer. For us older people, I would say a half an hour at the very, very least at the beginning of every day to get right with God. And not only to that, but to get the power moving through us. As we get along with it, we take a little longer. I usually take it 1 hour the first thing in the morning, and I guess many people do that. Other times later on during the day if there is a chance. Well, now I was doing all that. Just as hard as I could. And furthermore, people were coming to me all the time, and I was helping them, and they still got help too. They still did. But I didn't my own self. Other people would come with fears and worries and one thing and another, and I'd pray for them, and their fears and worries would go away. But I still had fears and worries myself, and they didn't go away. In fact, some old fears and worries that I had some years ago and had gotten completely over for a great many years came popping up again. I really got frightened. I thought, after all these years of helping other people, am I going to slide back hill again and get into this state of depression again? Because these fears that weren't reasonable at all just popped up again inside of me, and I couldn't do anything about it. Now, I was doing the first 2 things in the creative act, but I had not as yet realized any necessity for doing the 3rd thing, and that's what I wasn't doing, and that's why I got in this state of mind. Now, let's go back to the story that we were talking about last night in the 1st of Genesis. First of all, God saw in his mind the plan of this world. We know that because the plan itself shows us that it was conceived in the mind of a creator. Secondly, God sent that out into action on his spoken word. He said, let there be light, and there was light. Then thirdly, From time to time we are told in that quaint old language, I just love that story, that God checked on what he had made. The evening and the morning were the first day. Evening and the morning were the second day. And God looked at what he had made, and lo, it was good. Lo, it was very good. At the end of every period, we know perfectly well, if we think about it just a minute, that the word day in that place does not mean a day of 24 hours. It couldn't possibly, because a day of 24 hours is governed by the sun and the moon and their rotation around, sun, moon, and earth, and their rotation around each other. And at that time, the sun and the moon and the earth had not been created. There was only the original primal energy moving. And so it couldn't have been a 24-hour day. Obviously, it means a period of time, as the word is very often used in the Bible and as we use it ourselves. The day of the Lord, the day of judgment, and so on. A period of time with a beginning and an ending. Or rather, with an ending and a beginning, because it always says, and the evening and the morning were the third day, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And somehow I just love that, because it suggests to me that all of God's days end with a new beginning. They don't end with the coming down of dark night, they end with the coming up of a new dawn. So at the end of every day, or every period of time, it said God looked at what he had made, and lo, it was good. And he didn't go on with the next step of creation until he had checked, like any careful workman would, had checked over what he had made to see if it was good. And it was good, so then he went on to the second stage. There came a time in the working out of creation when things weren't good. Remember the old story of the flood, which is testified to by many ancient histories. At that time, things weren't good. This man that God had made and put in the earth to be the head gardener of his Garden of Eden, that man was not managing things very well. And so the Bible tells us at that time that God wiped it all out with the flood and started over again with just a few little new seeds of life, of people and animals and so forth, and started it all over again. It wasn't good. Out it went. He made another start. Now, there is one of the principles of creative action. And for many years I didn't see that. But it was a wonderful discovery when I did see it. Now you think of what you do when you write something, for instance. That is, if you're any good as a writer at all, and I expect when you went to school and wrote themes, you did something like this. First you write something. You get an idea in your mind. That's the first thing of all. You can feel the idea coming inside of you. You can just sort of feel it boiling up inside of you. Sometimes you get the sense and feeling of the thing before you even have the words to put it into. You just feel the thing beginning to come. And it gets brighter and brighter until you see in your mind just what you're going to write. If you don't like to write, transfer this to painting or sewing or gardening or something else that you do like to do. You see in your mind the thing that you want to do. And then you get to work. You go at it. You send it forth in your spoken word, only of course if it's writing, why you also have to write it down unless you're dictating, but that's the general idea. Or if it's painting, you do it with a brush, but you project it into action. And while you're doing that, you're seeing it perfect, you're seeing it beautiful, you're seeing it good. If you lose that inner seeing, then your thing is no good now, isn't that true? Suppose you're writing a story, like when you go to school, if you get really interested in some short story you're writing in high school. As long as you're interested in that thing, as long as you have clearly and distinctly and beautifully in your mind that picture of the thing you're going to write, why, it goes pretty well, doesn't it? But if you lose that picture, something interrupts you and you go on off to a hockey game or something else, and you come back and you think, oh, this thing, and you just can't get that feeling anymore, why, from then on it's no good, isn't that so? And the same thing applies to making a dress. Now, you folks know if you ever make clothes anymore, if you're really interested in that thing and steamed up about it, you have fun making it. It comes along all right. Then if you put away that half-made dress and you have to do the house cleaning or something and you don't get back to it for a month or two, isn't it just like pulling eye teeth to finish that thing? You know, you've just lost interest in it. Your original picture's faded out. And like as not, it never is any good. Sometimes it never does even get finished. So that's the truth now. So you see, there it is with any kind of a creative action. And that's the way it is with the Christian life. We get an idea in our minds. You come to this camp and you get a new idea of starting out fresh and living in a more powerful and a victorious way. And then you go at it. And while that idea is fresh and clear in your minds, you go at it with vigor and strength and power, and you really make something of it. You come back home and people say, what has happened to you? You're a different person. and your whole house is brighter, your whole family is brighter. It just goes fine. Just goes fine. But then after a while, it kind of dims down. You see, with me, I was going fine. I went fine for quite some years with various ups and downs and difficulties of many kinds, naturally. You get used to being kicked out of here and there after a while. But I was going fine. You see, I was quite a pioneer when I started this, and I started all alone. And so that's what I mean when I say you get used to being kind of ostracized and so on like that. But in spite of that, why, everything was going fine until after a while, the thing began to dim down inside of me. I began to get stale. I began to get just kind of bored with the whole thing. I was going through the motions, and the results were still happening, not quite as well, not as promptly, but still in all, it did come through. But inside of me, I knew I was on the skids. I knew absolutely I was on the skids. I didn't know whether I could keep it up another year or not. In fact, a friend of mine who was very psychic and whose guidance I always trusted very much told me that if I went on that way, I would surely and undoubtedly crack up inside of the year. Well, I thought about it a while, and I thought, well, if I crack up, my friends will say, well, poor Agnes, she's landed in the insane asylum. We always thought she would. But at least they'd understand why I wasn't running around helping people anymore. But if I just simply quit, that was hauling down my flag, and I didn't think, so I decided, no, I'll just go ahead and let the chips fall where they may. And so about that time, the third step in the act of creation came to me. It's entirely a different step. And yet, if you think of it in regard to making a dress or painting a picture or writing something, it's as clear and plain as the nose on your face, and you think, why, of course, why didn't I ever think of that before? Because the third step in the act of creation is to turn around and look at the thing that you're making in an entirely different way, in a cold and critical frame of mind. Do you see what I mean? When you first write that story, you're so filled with the beauty of it that you feel inside of you that as you write it down, every word and every sentence to you is beautiful. You don't see anything wrong in it. There it is. But if you put that aside for a week and then go back to it and throw yourself purposely into a different kind of mood and look at that in a cold and critical way, why, you would be surprised. Oh, you see words that can come out and words that must come out because you'll say the same word 3 times in one sentence sometimes. You'll find where you have about 6 S's on a line, and it hisses when you say it out loud. You'll find all kinds of things that you never even saw the first time. And so therefore, if you're going to be any kind of a real creator, after you have done seeing the thing in your mind and seeing it beautiful, and after you have finished putting it into action just as well as you possibly can, then you want to turn around and change your mood. And look at it just as coldly and just as critically as you possibly can, with the idea of seeing all its faults. Now, at first I thought that was contradictory. But the more I think about it, the more I see it's not contradictory at all. You not only look at it to see its faults, you get your friends to criticize it for you. And when they criticize it, you don't get mad either. You say, well, thanks. That's fine. I didn't see that. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Yes, that does sound silly. Yes, I'll take that out. Yes, I didn't mean that. That's not the way I meant it. I see that it doesn't say what I meant it to say. Well, thanks a lot. I'll change that. Now, that's the way it is with any kind of a creative work. All right, then. Let's apply that to the work of healing or the work of powerful prayer. We're not really talking about healing. We're talking about effective prayer. Really, what we're talking about, seems to me, is the Christian life. At least to me, the Christian life is effective prayer. Because what is prayer anyway? Prayer is exposing your spirit to the eternal Spirit of God so that He can print His image on you. And so that you can make that active in the world. Well, isn't that the Christian life? Seems to me like it is. And that everything else that you do is just a sort of a byproduct of it. That's, at least I would say, that's the core and the center of the Christian life. Then, let's apply this rule to the Christian life. First of all, you see, we see ourselves as we want to be. If we are not well, we make in our minds a picture of ourselves well. If we are full of fears and angers and so on, we get ourselves full of love, as we were talking about a night or two ago, and send out that love to other people, and ask God to fill us with His love, and take away our fears, and then we see ourselves as children of light, as children of God, as the sons and daughters of God. We make that picture in our minds, and that's right that we should. Absolutely right that we should. And then we carry that out in our spoken word, in our conversations, and in our action. We act accordingly, and we speak accordingly, the very best we know how. We pray with as much power as we can muster up for other people and for ourselves. We do our work in the power and in the strength of God just as much as we know how. Now that's fine up to a certain point. But the same laws of creativity apply there as apply to anything else. And if we're really going to be good workmen in the Christian life, it's up to us at times to look at ourselves in a different tone of voice, to look at ourselves coldly and critically, and stop seeing ourselves as sons and daughters of God, and stop telling ourselves that we're God's perfect children and that His light dwells in us. Look into ourselves coldly and critically to see wherein we failed. Not because we want to be miserable and unhappy, but because we want to be happy. We want to see wherein we have failed, so that we can correct that thing. You see? And when we have seen it, we want to say it out loud. We want to express it in words. We want to confess it, either to God or in the presence of some human friend who can help us. We want to get it out of our system. We want to say, look, I see I'm this way and that way. I didn't know it. I didn't realize it. But now I see. I'm very sorry. Yes, we want to get that out of us and start straight again. We want to check up on ourselves from time to time. Now I'm going to have another talk a little more in detail on this, probably sometime next week. But right now I want to proceed along this line, which I really haven't talked like this before, but it's come to me recently that we should, that we're perhaps too neglectful of it. To check on ourselves. Well, what are we going to check by? What is our standard anyway? What is our measuring rod? What is the rule? How are we going to tell whether we are good, bad, or indifferent? Now let's go back to our consideration of what God is. God is light and life. We said that the first time. God is love. God is creativity. Now what else is God? What kind of a God is God? What is the nature and being of God? Well, the Bible tells us that God is good. That's a simple thing to say, isn't it? God is good. We know that. We're apt to say it, though, in a very false way. We say, oh, yes, God is good. Meaning by that we can be as bad as we want to, and He'll still be nice to us. But the Bible interpretation of God as a good God is not so, but quite otherwise. The Bible tells us as a God who demands goodness. A God who is good, whose nature is completely good, whose power works entirely according to the laws of holiness, whose nature is holiness, and who does not send His life and power into people unless they are holy, unless they are good. Now, all this is so simple, so primary. We take for granted, of course, we want to be good. Of course, we want to lead a good Christian life. And then we build all of this superstructure of faith and prayer and triumphant results of the prayer on top of that foundation, and that's just right that we should. But the only trouble is that from time to time our foundation gets shaky. And that's why the superstructure is no good. That's why it topples. Sometimes people say to me, sometimes they write to me and they say, I've done all the things you say in your book, but it doesn't work. Why? I know why, but I don't tell them. I know why. It's because their foundation is too shaky. They do all those things, sure, but that's just the superstructure. But how about the foundation of the original holiness of God? How are they carrying that out? So now let's check a little bit on our foundation. I think we've got a pretty good foundation here, but there's no foundation that's so good that it can't be improved upon. So let's check on it. Now, God is good. What is goodness? What is the law of goodness? Jesus Christ summed it up when He said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and all thy mind, and all thy soul, and as thy neighbor as thyself. He did sum it up in that. But I think that it would be a good idea if we split it up again into the component parts that make up that love. That love is the pure white light of God. And if we follow that law sincerely enough and fully enough, it does cover everything. But the trouble is that it's so easy just to say, oh yes, I have love, oh yes, I have love, and not follow the law, not consider carefully enough whether our actions are entirely in accord with the law of love. So let's go back tonight and just check on this. Now let's check by the standard that's given in the Old Testament. Jesus Christ came not to destroy that standard, I mean the Ten Commandments that were given to Moses. They haven't gone out of style because they're built into our natures. Moses received a revelation from God in which he only stated in words, negatively I would say. I mean, instead of saying you shall do this, he said you shan't do this. Well, that was the way they thought in those days. But you can very easily turn it over and see the general idea. But he did state there, by the revelation of God, a system of laws that's built into you and it's built into me. You can't get around it. There isn't any way to get around it. Because every one of those things is necessary to follow, every one of those laws, in order to make up altogether that white light which is the perfect love of God. And we know that we need to have that perfect love of God. So now let's just briefly check. This is funny, isn't it, going back to the Ten Commandments? Well, you can't do any harm going back to the Ten Commandments after all. That's original and fundamental. First one is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well, do we? Now let's check. How about when it comes time to vote? Did you ever hear of anyone who voted a certain way because his job depended on it, regardless of whether that way was the best for the coming of the kingdom of heaven? If you did hear of any person who voted because he would lose his job if he voted contrary-wise, but not because he thought that was the best for the coming of the kingdom of heaven, then there you've got somebody who has another God before God. He puts his business before God. Puts his business before God. Have you ever heard of people who would say, yes, I know this isn't not just exactly what is the thing to do, but this is business. You got to do this in business. Knowing that the thing that he did was contrary to the laws of God, but doing it because it was business. If so, that person has put his business before God. He has another God before God. Now, if your foundation is shaky in that manner, check on yourself and correct it. And if you don't want to correct it, all right. But never mind doing these prayer things I've been telling you about, because there's no use doing them on a shaky foundation. You'll get away with it for a while, oh sure. But one of these days your foundation will get overloaded and your house will crash. You may get away with it and have a real good time with it for quite some years. But unless you build up that foundation, just as sure as I'm standing here, the time will come when your house of prayer will crash. So check on it. Check on it. It takes quite a lot of checking, you know. It takes an awful lot of courage to keep the laws of God. Awful lot of courage. I've had a number of women friends who have listened to me and have followed my ideas until it got to the place where they either had to backtrack or they'd be criticized by their social friends, whereupon they have backtracked. Is that having another God before God? Seems to me like it is. They put their social life and their social standing before God. Now that doesn't mean that we have to unnecessarily get ourselves criticized. I do think that the wisest thing we can do about that is to just be very still and keep most of our prayer experiments a secret between ourselves and God, only telling them if they'll do anyone any good. I'm not advising you all to get up on soapboxes and make a noise and get yourself to be martyrs, not that. But I just mean if one has to choose, then it's just as well once in a while to remember that first of all commandment. We shall not have any other God, any other thing that we worship more than we worship God. Nor that same idea carries on in the second. We don't need to go into each one of these just exactly in detail. We get the general thought. Nor any graven image. That's the same idea, of course. We should remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. As I say, I'm not going into every one of these in detail. We should reverence the name of God. Well, I think we do that pretty well. Shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. I don't think that's one that we go against too much. someone told me the nicest way of praying, if you hear anybody else taking the Lord's name in vain that I've ever heard, comes in the rules of an Episcopal order that I belong to, the Confraternity of the Holy Cross. And one of the rules is that if you hear anybody else cursing and swearing and taking the Lord's name in vain, which does make you feel uncomfortable inside, that you say a prayer of adoration to the holy name. Don't you think that's lovely? Now that's a little addition to the commandment, but really, if you do that, it's very comforting. Just say your own little prayer of adoration to God, as if to console Jesus Christ for having to hear his name tossed around the streets. Lord, I'm sorry they used your name like that. I love and adore your holy name. Accept my praise and adoration. Well, it makes you feel good inside. Sometimes you'll find that it almost miraculously seems to quiet the other person and they don't go on talking like that anymore. We remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, the only thing about that we do here is we seem to think every day is a Sabbath day, don't we? Going to church every time we turn around. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that one because I imagine that most of you do remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. There is something, there's something extra and special. Even though we do go to church here all the time, there's a special service that we can render to our Lord if we will go to our own churches. Glenn has talked on this, and I'm not going to make a whole talk on it. But in case any of you do wonder how much good there is in going to church, if you feel that the minister isn't sympathetic and the congregation doesn't understand and so forth, I just want to tell you, I don't think there's anything that you can do that is more deeply pleasing to our Lord himself. I just think he appreciates it and loves you. When you go back home, as you do, I know, and you go to church, and you sit in that church and you pray for the congregation, and you pray for the minister, and you help to bring the kingdom of the heaven in that church, even if when you first start, the church is not very receptive. In fact, the less receptive they are, why, the more the Lord loves you if you try and do it for his sake. So, don't give up and forget to keep the Sabbath day holy to the Lord. Don't just think, oh, well, I'm so good anyway, and say my prayers every day and go to all these CFOs, I don't have to go to church. Some people are about like that, I think really one misses a great opportunity, as you heard Ben say. Misses a great opportunity to glorify God and to follow his commandments and to straighten up and streamline and purify this life of ours if we don't go to church and use that as a place to glorify his name. Then the next commandment, honor your parents. In the old, that seems a little funny to us, because it really means to obey your parents, like in the New Testament, I think, St. Paul said, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Well, in the old system of government, the family was the unit of control, and the family was the government. And so, that was a lesson in obedience. To follow the law, to keep the law, to be obedient. And that's a tremendously important thing. Most of us are past that age now, but I think the thing that we should keep in mind is that we have a right and a duty to teach our children to be obedient. Now, I'm sure that most of you do, but some parents nowadays seem to get the funny idea that you're not supposed to teach children to mind, that you're supposed to just let them grow up and do as they like. They must express themselves, or else they must be inhibited or thwarted or something or other like that. Well, unfortunately, life is not like that. In life, we don't go around just expressing ourselves willy-nilly all the time. A man doesn't get up in the morning and think, well, now, how shall I express myself today? He's got to get up and go to work, whether he likes it or not. A woman doesn't get up in the morning and just start in living her own life and expressing herself. She's got to cook and wash the dishes, whether or no, or teach school, or whatever it is she does. In other words, life absolutely demands obedience. There are laws, and they absolutely have to be kept. Even the law of just good, steady, hard work. There simply isn't any way to get around them. And so therefore, to let children grow up with the idea that there's no such thing as obedience, and they don't have to obey, is terribly unkind to the children. Because when they grow up and they meet life head-on, they're perplexed and upset, and all kinds of strange things happen to them. They are undisciplined, they can't control their minds, they can't control their actions, because when they were very little, they haven't been taught to obey. So now, let's just check on ourselves. Do we obey the laws of life? Do we just do our plain, straight, ordinary duty? Do we do our jobs as well as we should? Do we really work at earning our living and at cooking and at doing the things like that we ought to do? Are we doing right in those ways, or are we being sloppy workmen? Now, this is not the kind of a way that we should think every day, you know. I'm going to tell you presently, suggest to you presently, about when and about how often to think after this manner. Not very often, I do assure you. This is the only time that I'm going to talk like this while I'm here at the camp. And I wouldn't want any of you to go to work and examine yourselves and think like this more than, say, once a week. I'll tell you that right now. Maybe Saturday night so as to get ready for Sunday, to receive the grace of God anew on Sunday. And not every day. But once in a while, it is most tremendously necessary. And also, if you do it and follow it through once in a while, it just leads you out into the most radiant joy that you can possibly imagine. It's the most releasing and freeing and glorious thing in the world. To see your mistakes and to correct them and to get free of them. Nothing, really, and that is more thrilling than that. Now, the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. You know, we're apt to just take for granted we keep these commandments. Oh, sure, of course we do. We don't need to bother with them. We are beyond that. We're above that. But the commandment just says, thou shalt not kill. And when Peter took up his sword in defense of his master, you'd think even a more noble cause in self-defense, and cut off the centurion's ear, Jesus Christ put it on and healed it again and said, put up your sword. And he never had anything to do with such things. He literally kept that commandment. And the early Christians literally kept that commandment. And while they literally kept that commandment, the power of healing flowed through the church tremendously like rivers of water. And when they stopped keeping that commandment, and when they undertook to have crusades and holy wars and pogroms and massacres of people who weren't Christians and inquisitions and all such things as that, then the power of God departed from the church. Just went right up, departed. Thou shalt not kill. You and I can't help it if we are mixed up in the nation's wars. And as I told you once before, I'm not standing up here being a pacifist or whatever the other word is, conscientious objector, because seriously and truly I do not know if I were a man whether I would prefer to go to war or whether I would prefer to go to a CCC camp. I honestly don't know, because I would just feel neither one is right. You're just stuck either way. You're just stuck either way. The only right way is the way that you can't do because the nation isn't up to it. The only right way is to perfect the weapon of love so surely that that weapon is going to triumph. You know, people like to say, now which would you do? If an armed intruder burst into your house with intent to kill, what would you do? Would you just lie still and do nothing? Or would you arise and fall upon him and kill him or beat him up or something? Well, you see, both are wrong. I mean, neither one of them is the perfect way. I probably would jump out of bed and beat him up if I was a man. But anyway, neither one of them is the perfect way. The perfect way is to have so much of the love of Christ in you that you could project the love of Christ into his mind. Just ask Jesus Christ to go through you and put his love into his mind, and then make in your mind a picture of him changing and see his original nature, his Christ nature, coming out of him again. And then he would change his mind, and he wouldn't hurt anybody. Now that's the only right way to do. The only right way to do. Well, you and I can't help it if we are mixed up in ways that aren't right. We can't help it. But, just the same, in a sense, we are breaking that commandment. So what can we do about it? You have to do something about it, or else you've got a shaky foundation under you, don't you see? Well, we'll have another talk later on ways in which, while we can't help that, ways in which we can repent of it, and ways in which we can atone for it, and ways in which we can send out so much goodness in another way and ask God to accept it as a sign and token of the fact that we are sorry that we are mixed up in a thing that we know is evil, which is war. In some manner we can do like that. Now Jesus Christ added to this law, thou shalt not kill. He said, right straight out, he said in the Old Testament it says that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say unto you that you turn the other cheek. In the Old Testament it says, whoever killeth his brother is a murderer, but I say unto you, whosoever is angry with his brother is a murderer. You see, he didn't come to destroy any of the laws of Moses. They still stand. But he came to add to them. And so when we check on ourselves, and I won't need to say any more about this because we had a whole talk about this 2 nights ago, when we come to check on ourselves, we can check on this also. How well are we keeping that law? We can turn it around the positive way. I like it better the positive way, the way Jesus said, which is that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. How well are we keeping that law? We can check on ourselves in regard to that, too. And then the 7th commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. Now, we know that. I mean, that's all basic. We absolutely take that for granted. And yet, sometimes it's a good thing to mention that, because once in a while, to my complete amazement, I find somebody who is carrying out all of these things. I had a girl talk to me one time, and she said, I'm doing all the things you said in your book. I'm doing all those things, she said. I'm following all those laws of life. But she said, I'm still nervous, and I'm this way and that. I forget just what was the matter with her, but she was very, very nervously and mentally upset. She said, I don't know. She said, of course, I have had a number of affairs, but psychiatrists told me that that was good for me. And she said, I don't know whether that has anything to do with my nervous tension or not. Well, I sort of gasped for breath, and I said, what do you mean, affairs? Oh, she said, I have lived with several men, first one and then another and then another. She was not married. But she said, I don't think that's wrong. She said, I know people used to think that's wrong, but she said, I don't think that's wrong. Psychiatrists tell me that's good for me. Well, that was a revelation to me. I was so stunned I didn't say anything. I don't think that I was very helpful to her at that time, because really I was just so completely bowled over to think that there could be anybody who could really and truly think that that 7th commandment has gone out of style. That 7th commandment is basic. It's as basic as any other one that ever was. It never can go out of style. It is not possible for it to go out of style, because the very nature of God is goodness. God is good. God is pure. The being of God is chaste. Any sin against the chastity and the purity of God defiles the inner being. It throws a guilt feeling into the inner mind, the subconscious mind. It doesn't matter how much the conscious mind may rationalize. It doesn't matter what any number of psychiatrists can say. It doesn't matter. It throws a feeling of guilt just the same into that inner subconscious mind. Sometimes, as a matter of fact, rather tragically, throws much more of a feeling of guilt than is necessary. I've known some perfectly lovely people whose sin against that law was so slight, a shadow of a sin, hardly anything, and yet who had been tormented all their lives by that feeling of guilt that it throws. But the thing is real. There's no possible getting around it. And there again, Jesus Christ improved on that law. I mean, he brought it up to date. He said, I say unto you, whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. In other words, impure thoughts, unchaste thoughts, are a breaking and an infringing of that law. Now, that's a very important thing to bring about. For this reason, a very important thing for me to mention, for this reason, that when we begin experimenting as powerfully as we do here in the camps and many other places, with the effective working of the love of God, the very fact that we do that arouses in us great creativity, great feelings of love and compassion. They are aroused. They are aroused. Now, some people, when they are aroused, do not understand them and do not know what to do with them. And some people set up a false connection of ideas. And having those feelings aroused, and reading in the Bible about how love is redemptive and so on, there are people who decide that the thing for them to do is to get rather violent emotional attachments, and in that manner to redeem and help other people. It's very hard to draw a fine line between the love of Christ and love that isn't of Christ. And yet it's not too hard. We can do it if we put our minds to it. We can do it if we put our minds to it. But I have known people who have started healing. I don't mean anyone connected here. I read a life story one time about a minister he was, who started out to be a marvelous healer. A marvelous healer. But so much of the love of Christ was aroused in him, and he didn't know how to separate it from human affection, and he got rather mixed up with 2 or 3 different women, and he gave up in despair. He just had to stop. He just simply was finished. Well, that can happen if we don't watch it. And it's easy to watch it if we put our minds on it. How are we going to decide what is the love of Christ and what isn't the love of Christ? Very simple ways. The kind of love that doesn't hurt anybody is the love of Christ. And the kind of love that might possibly hurt anybody is not the love of Christ. Now, isn't that easy? Any kind of love or affection that might hurt a husband or a wife, if they knew about it, or that is demonstrated in any way that might hurt a husband or a wife, if they knew about it, isn't the love of Christ. That's easy. Very easy, but the thing that makes it tricky is that it's so easy to fool ourselves, you see. And so we do have to be kind of careful about that. It's so easy to fool ourselves. We have to tell ourselves, well, this is really fine. This is on a high spiritual plane. The only thing is my husband wouldn't understand. Whereas, as a matter of fact, he'd probably understand absolutely too darn well. But you know, another way of differentiating is whether this unusual amount of affection, and we can have an unusual amount of affection. Sometimes it takes that. Jesus Christ, greatly to our consolation, loved some people more than others, and no one ever criticized him for that I know of. It was so obviously and recognizably holy and divine love. And nobody ever objected because St. John was called the beloved disciple. Now, isn't that wonderful when you think of it? Nobody ever thought anything wrong of that. It was just obviously Christ-like love. There was never anything the least bit in any way improper or inappropriate or indecent or suggestive or anything else connected with it. And while they criticized him about all kinds of things, everything under the sun, moon, and stars, some of them even criticized him for eating too much and drinking too much and for not washing his hands before he ate and for rubbing the wheat in his hands. They thought of everything under the sun, moon, and stars they could think of to criticize him about. But there, that was so obviously clear and pure and beautiful that nobody ever did. And yet he did, greatly to our consolation, have his special friends and love some of them in a very special way more than others. And you know, we need that. We need to show the love of Christ and the compassion of Christ and the goodwill of Christ toward everyone, good, bad, or indifferent. But yet at the same time, for our own comfort and consolation and for the rest of our hearts, we do need our special friends. And we do need different kinds of affection that we feel for different kinds of people. And that is quite all right. But one way we can test whether it's all right is, as I said, whether or not it could possibly hurt anyone. If it could, then it is not all right. If it seems high and fine and noble to us, but if the way that we demonstrate it could be misunderstood, could be shocking to anyone else, then it isn't all right. Because pure and perfect love has no excuse or reason in any way to offend or shock anyone. Now, there's just no way that you can get around it. Just no way you can get around it. Because you try and you break yourself on the law of the purity of God. You can't change God, He is. Can't change Him, He is. And when you try and get His life in you, and then let His life express itself through you in unworthy ways, you're playing with fire. So it's much the best to recognize it and check on that. Another way we can tell whether it's all right is whether or not it's possessive love. Now that is rather hard, because our human hearts sort of like to possess. You know, if you're awfully fond of somebody, you do like to think that that person is your very best friend and really, you know, doesn't love anybody else quite as much as they love you, but really that is selfish. That's not honestly the love of Christ. Not honestly the love of Christ. And yet there can be very great and real loves, very great, very real, that are humbly willing not to possess, that can go on loving and giving, and not possessing, and still be content for the sake of Jesus Christ. When it's like that, then that is the most beautiful, the most constructive, the most life-giving feeling, I guess, that there is in the world. So now the 8th commandment. And after tonight, I'm not going to talk any more like this, so excuse me while I get on through. I'm afraid to some of you think, oh, shucks, I knew that before she was born. Well, I know, so did I, but yet I have to check on it from time to time, or I find that I've slept without knowing I slept, you see. So the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. I tripped over that one time. I remember I was the president of the auxiliary that year. And it was all the Lord's fault, too. I mean, it really wasn't. I didn't really mean to be. I was sitting in the auxiliary meeting, and nobody else would be the president of the auxiliary because Ethel Hollinshead had been president of it for 50 years, or possibly it was 75. And she had spent all of those years telling everybody how hard she worked and what an awful thing it was to be president of the women's auxiliary. So when she finally resigned, nobody would be it. So I was the minister's wife, and so I was rather concerned, and so I just said, oh, Lord, please put into somebody's heart to be president of this women's auxiliary. And the voice inside said, do it yourself. And I said, oh, no, that wasn't my idea at all. But you know, when you pray, you often stick your neck out. So the guidance was very clear, and so I let it be known by the grapevine telegraph that if sufficiently urged, I would be president of the women's auxiliary. And so in due time, I was president of the women's auxiliary. But one time I had to put on a card party for it. Was there anything I hate more than another? It's putting on a card party for the women's auxiliary or anything else. Oh, all that detail and fuss and bother and trying to keep everybody organized and get all the right people playing together. Oh, dear. Well, anyway, we made a lot of money, though, for the heathen, and I sure hope it did them some good. Because it didn't do me any good, not that time. And by the time it was over, I was in such a state of nervous tension, and I had to take somebody home, and so I backed the car out of the drive, and I backed into a Bell Telephone Company truck that was across the street, and I just put a dent in the fender, just a very small dent, very small dent. Well, I wonder why it makes you feel so awful when you back into a car, but it sure does. So I got out and looked around. The driver wasn't there. I looked up and down the street, and I didn't see the driver anywhere. I waited a minute or two to see if he came out of the house, but he didn't come out of the house. So Satan entered into me, and I began to reason with myself, and I said, now, that's a very small dent, and I'm sure the Lord doesn't want me to do anything about it, because if he did, why, he'd see to it the driver is here. So I didn't feel too comfortable about that, but I went on back in the house, and I argued some more, and I said to myself, now I'm sure that truck is insured. And I pay my telephone bills, and undoubtedly the telephone bills pay for the insurance on the truck. And so I'm sure that the insurance will take care of that little dent, and after all, the driver wasn't there, and I just don't think I'll have to do anything about that. Well, so then I tried to get busy praying for some people that wanted me to pray for them. Do you know I couldn't do it? I just couldn't do it. There just wasn't any power there at all. The prayers just wouldn't rise. I tried and I tried and I tried, no soul. So I reasoned with myself some more. The more I reasoned with myself, the harder it got, you see, and the more time passed, the harder it got. But a whole day passed, and I couldn't pray at all. You see, here is one good thing about this business of learning to pray about definite, specific things, like people that are sick. They either get well or they don't get well. I mean, there it is. You can't get around it. Either the power of God helps them through your prayer, or else it fails to help them. Of course, if it fails to help them, you could say, well, it's God's will, but I long ago gave up that alibi. I decided if I was going to use that as an alibi, I'd never get any place. So I always figure if it doesn't help, why, it's Agnes's fault, unless it's a thing that's just too tough, that I've done everything I possibly can, and obviously it's time to go over, that's different, but no, nothing happened. So I thought, well, there's nothing for it. I will just have to make that right. So I went down and I called up the Bell Telephone Company, and I told them that the day before yesterday, I think it was, I had backed into a truck on the corner, and I just wanted to call up and tell them about it. Well, the girl nearly fainted on the other end of the line. It looked like I was going to have to pray for her. Because she was so startled at anybody calling up and telling about it. She really was in a state of shock. But then when she recovered from that, she was perfectly lovely. She was so grateful that it made me feel like a dog. I thought, well, for goodness sake, If I known it could give anybody this much happiness, I certainly wouldn't have hesitated. She was just so grateful. And she said, well, the drivers have to pay for that. Now, you see, old Satan, he wasn't telling me the truth at all when he told me it was probably insured. He says the drivers have to pay for that. And so I'm glad. I'm just so glad you told me. And so I sent her a check for $3, and that was the cheapest I ever paid for peace of mind. Pay any psychiatrist more than $3 any time and not get anything like the peace of mind that I got from fixing that right about the telephone. This law, thou shalt not steal, it's not so far removed from us as we might think it is. One time in Los Angeles, a young medical student followed me out after a talk, and he said, I read your book, The Healing Light, and he said, frankly, I laughed quite a lot. He said, I thought it was very screwy. And he said, I'm not sure I believe it yet. But I said, well, I can understand that. Being a medical student, it's kind of hard. You're looking at the other side of the picture. He said, well, I'm not sure, but I'm sort of interested. I'd like to know more. So I just took a notion to say, well, if you'd like to come on back here in this room, I said, if you've got enough real interest and enough real religion so that you wouldn't interfere with me, so that you wouldn't get in my way, you could come back here while I pray for somebody. Now, I wouldn't very often say that, but somehow I looked at his face and I just knew he was right. I just knew he was all right. So he said, oh, I'm sure I wouldn't interfere. I do believe in God, and I honestly want to know. So I said, all right then, you come in here with me. And so we prayed for this woman who had some kind of a very bad condition, I forget what, that caused the blood not to circulate in her legs. And so just on impulse, I put my hands on her heart, and just on impulse, I said to this fellow, I said, if you want to, you can kneel down there and put your hands on her feet. Because you see, the feet were cold and the legs were cold. There had been no blood circulating there, and they were very cold. In fact, they were about to amputate until her hospital chaplain got hold of the book and read it and prayed for her, and she was enough better, so she was up and out of the hospital, only she wasn't well yet. And because they had turned quite purple or something, and then they were starting to get gangrene, so it was quite serious. So he knelt down there and put his hands on her feet. And so we prayed, and she felt a great power rushing through her, and she said that her feet got warm for the first time in 3 or 4 months. And this young chap was very much impressed. He said, I could feel it. I could feel the power of God. I could feel it in my hands. It went all the way up my arms. Oh, he said, that's wonderful. He said, you know what I'm going to do as soon as I go home? I'm going to write a letter and write a check for $30. He said, that really belongs to somebody else. I cheated about that $30. I'm going to go home and write that letter and send that check and apologize. Now, you see, he had the right idea. He had seen power. What was the first thing that came to him? He was in the presence of a power that was holy, of a holiness that was God. Therefore, he must make right that matter of $30 that was not right in his life. He was a poor fellow. He was working his way by the skin of his teeth through medical college. It meant an awful lot to him. I never have seen him again, but I'm quite sure that the Lord made it up to him. But that was an important thing to him. He might have had to go with only 2 meals a day for a month on account of giving back that $30, but he went home and he gave it back. Now that man, I've never seen him again, but I can tell you right now, that man is going to succeed. He'll be able to do it because he's building himself a solid foundation, and that was the very first thought that came up to him, you see, and I hadn't said one word. Strengthen your foundation, build your foundation. That came to him, the Lord showed him. The Lord showed him. You know, there are many things that we've done in our past that now they're water under the dam. We can't correct them. We can get them forgiven, and I'm going to have another talk about that later on. But we can't change them. When they're done, they're done. And that's that. But there's one thing we can change. If in any way we have infringed against that 8th commandment, if at any time in business or anything else we have cheated, been dishonest, taken what was not ours, we can make it up, we can give it back. Now, if any of you are in that position, you're in a very happy position. You're sitting pretty. Because there's something perfectly plain, straightforward, sensible, and constructive that you can do. And as soon as you can do it, it'll release power. But if you don't want to do it, forget about all this that I'm talking about, because it won't work for you. It's no use. God is good. God is holy. He does not abide in habitations that are not suitable for him to abide in. He does not wait till we are perfect before he enters in. He knoweth our frame. He remembereth that we are dust. He knows. If we are doing our best, he will come and abide in us and help us to become more and more holy, more and more pure, more and more good. But if we have certain faults and we keep them and we hold on to them, and we have held on to them for so long that we have closed our eyes and refused to see them, then it's no use. It's no use. It is not going to work. I don't mean you won't go to heaven when you die. I'm not the least interested in where people go when they die, to tell you the truth. Well, I mean, that's not my job after all. I'm not a minister. What I mean is that... But what I mean is that the active power that transforms things is not going to work for you while you're here in this world. The rest of it is between you and God. So there's the 8th commandment. It's one you can really have fun with if you put your mind on it. I'll never forget Tom Lasher told me about how he put his mind on it. It was the Oxford group got it into his head. And he remembered one time he'd worked for a coal company and he cheated him out of $3. Well, he found the coal company. I've read in this case. Now, this is not really an instructive story. It's just kind of amusing. Because this didn't particularly work out right, except I guess it gave him a good laugh. It made him feel good, too, because he tried to return the $3. He found the coal company, but different people had it, and he went there and he tried to explain to this man about the $3. The man said, well, look, buddy, how can I take that back? Now, there ain't no place I can put that $3 on. Now, look, forget it, will you? And Tom said, no, I can't forget it. I've got to make good. I've got to give that $3. He argued and finally the man said, look, mister, will you go home? So I think in that case, he put the $3 in the plate to church and told the Lord, well, that was the best he could do. So now, let's go on just very rapidly. In the 9th commandment, we shall not bear false witness against our neighbors. Oh, sisters, that's one you and me better watch out for. I think we're more apt to do that than the men. You better watch out more for the 8th one, because that really gets quite involved with their business. But you know, we have to have some fun, and we don't get out as much as the boys do. And it surely is a temptation to bear false witness against our neighbors. I saw the doctor's car parked out of that woman's house. Somebody told me that. Stayed there till 12 o'clock at night. 3 nights in succession. Now, you don't need to tell me. Well, you know, that's a lot of fun how you do it, maybe. But really, it is bearing false witness against our neighbors, gossiping, passing tales on from one to another. And it's awfully hard to know what's false and what isn't false. In fact, I'm going to tell you something. Any tale that you pass about a neighbor is false. Because, I mean, any unhappy and unfortunate tale, in one way, is false. If you are telling it to some partner in prayer with whom you can pray about this thing and correct it, there may be a reason for telling it. But if you're telling it just to enjoy yourself, remember that in the long run it is false. Because really and truly, that neighbor about whom you're talking is one of God's children. And the original nature of that neighbor about whom you're talking is pure and holy. The original goodness of that person will endure from everlasting to everlasting, while the original sin that stuck with them in this little bit of a world will one day depart and not be anymore. What I'm getting at is, in this kind of roundabout way, that we do better if we don't see anything to talk about in our neighbors. If we fasten our attention only upon those qualities that are good, only upon the Christ self in them, and don't see anything else, and don't have anything to talk about except the Christ qualities that are good. Now, I'm preaching to me now because, more than to you, because I will confess that I have to watch this more than anything else. It's awfully hard to keep from, gossiping and passing on comments. But you never know when they might be false witness. And, as I say, in the long run, in the light of the original spiritual being, which is a child of God, anything you would say is false witness anyhow. So it's much better just to talk about something else. So we better watch that one. And now the 10th one. We shall not be jealous. We shall not envy our neighbor's house or his wife or anything else that he has. We shall not envy. You know, that is another tough one. That is a very, very difficult one. For me, these two last ones have been rather difficult and still are at times. With some people, they're difficult in church work. They're not difficult in church work for me, because I'm only just too tickled for everybody else to be presidents of the auxiliary and everything else that they will do. So in that way, it's not difficult for me. Anything anybody else will do will get me out of so much trouble. I got more of it than I want to do anyhow. But there was a time when it was rather difficult. I think now, really, I know I've got more spiritually than so-and-so, and why do they always get her to lead these meetings and they never ask me to? Did you ever think like that? Well, that's breaking a commandment. That is departing from the holiness of God. Now, I haven't taken time to check up every one of these commandments against the law of love, but if you will take time yourself, you'll see that each one of them breaks the law of love. If you have enough of that love of that neighbor of yours, you'll think, oh, isn't it lovely that they're getting Mrs. So-and-so to teach this class and to give this lecture? You'll think, I'm just so glad for her to have the opportunity to do it. That's a wonderful thing for her to do. I'm so thrilled that she's got that pleasure. Now, that's how you think if you love her enough, isn't it? If it was your own daughter, that's how you think, isn't it? Why, you'd be more tickled and pleased at any thing that anybody would ask her to do, any honor they'd give her, you'd be more pleased than if they gave it to you. Isn't that true? Well, we should love our fellow Christians as if they were our own daughters and our own sisters and our own neighbors and our own selves. So there is another one that we can watch, we can check on, we can straighten our lives by it. Straighten our lives by it. Now, don't let all of this be upsetting and distressing to you, because it isn't. I'm going to stop now, for there isn't time to go on, but I'm going to tell you in another lecture how you can do it. I mean, here it is. Here is what we should do, but we can't do it by our own strength, you see. I know that as well as you do. We can't do it by our own strength. It's our job to do as much as we can of it by our own strength. But if we had to watch every single word that we said, and every single act that we did, and every single thought that went through our minds, we'd get entirely too worn out doing it. Now, wouldn't we? So, I'm not telling you that you have to watch it every minute. I'm telling you, there's the standard, there's the rule, and there's the plumb line.